Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. It's your hostess, Flamingo Writing here, and welcome back to, once again, another Magical Girl podcast video. So, let's talk about a story that we're all familiar with, Snow White. It should go without saying that Snow White really needs no introduction at this point. Whether you've read the story or at least heard of the story, we already know the drill of Snow White by this point. In fact, I go so far as to say Snow White is one of the most important stories out there in history, especially because of what it represents to us. I mean, my introduction to it was Walt Disney's Snow White. And when I say that, I'm not referring to the snow shit. You know what I mean. But either way you look at it, Snow White in of itself can be reused in a lot of ways to make an adaptation, except with the one that was shown right now. But in this case, we're looking at, once again, another Reverse Harem. And this isn't the first time I've talked about a Reverse Harem. If you recall from last year, I talked about a series known as The Wallflower. Looking back at it, it didn't really do very well, but I honestly stand by most of what I said in that video. And speaking of which, I was going to originally plan on doing a Reverse Harem list. However, I myself cannot talk about a Reverse Harem list due to a few things. One, I don't have that much on my list as is, and two, it might take a while to do so. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to stick with one other Reverse Harem, and hopefully next year, when I get the chance, maybe I'll talk about my favorite Reverse Harem out there. We'll have to see. So instead, I decided to talk about a Reverse Harem that, in a way, actually gives it Snow White vibes, except instead of 7 dwarfs, we have 7 knights. In this case, I'm referring to Prétear. Prétear was actually based on a manga by Junichi Sato and illustrated by Kaori Naruso, which is basically both Magical Girl and Reverse Harem. It was also serialized as a monthly Asuka Fantasy DX series from lasting for 2000 to 2001. While it was really popular during the time, though, the series itself only lasted for 4 volumes, and since then there hasn't been a lot of resumes of it anyways. But if you look online, maybe you can find it if you want to get a little read of it. I know nothing about the manga itself, but one thing's for sure, it did get my interest years ago when I was still looking up on Magical Girl shows. And considering the fact that I myself am a sucker for both Magical Girl and Reverse Harem romance, that should come as a bit of a leeway when it comes right down to it. However, the anime that we're looking at today actually has something to do with it, and it lasted for 13 episodes. Yeah, I'll get to my positives and negatives about it, but for right now, I think it's only fitting to at least get into. Yeah, this is one case where the anime itself doesn't really have as much content as I was thinking of, but despite having 13 episodes, you can find this series if you look hard enough. I mean, the anime itself has it on YouTube, but unfortunately not all the episodes. The only episodes you're going to find there are really something like, say, 8 full episodes, and the most you're going to get is multi-parters, if anything to judge by. But thankfully I was able to find it on a website that I already mentioned multiple times before, Watch Cartoon, but that's like the only thing if it comes to anything tuition. You know, I'm starting to realize that when it comes to shoujo these days, I start asking myself why aren't there most popular shoujo out there, but then I realize streaming services can be a bit double-edged sword. Yeah, some streaming services can show more than that, but that's beside the point. But without further ado, let's get into this story and talk about Prétear and see if it holds up, or see if there's anything that I personally think could be better. Yes, spoiler alert, there will be a mixed bag here, so keep that in mind. Our main story begins with our main protagonist, Himino Awayuki, a 16-year-old girl who used to live as a commoner with her dad, and now that she doesn't have her mother anymore, take a shot. And as you can probably get, as from there, she gets a better life after her father remarries a rich woman. As such, with not just her, but with also her own 2 daughters, who become her stepsisters. Wait, I thought this was supposed to be Snow White, but with a little bit of sleeping. The little Cinderella? Whatever gave you that idea, Flamingo. Anyways, yeah, apparently she seems like she has a more fractured and structural life, but considering that she doesn't really have that much going on for the wealth, she's more invested into just having a regular life. That is, until she meets up with the 7 However, these 7 knights aren't your ordinary knights. See, they're called the seven elemental leafy knights who will do anything to stop the Princess of Disaster, and in order to team up with any Prétear, because the Prétear herself has to be some sort of princess and such, but as time goes on, well, Himino, being a little reluctant, actually decides to join in a little bit later on as time goes on. While it seems like the knights are kind of hoping to find out where the Princess of Disaster is, usually they go so far as to fight off a lot of these here demons known as demon larvae. And the demon larvae are very dangerous, right to the point where it seems like the knights are not as strong as they are when it comes to fighting them. But in order to do so, they usually have to fuse in with Himino, who is the next tier. And considering that these here magical boys have to do whatever they can to fight off, they fuse in by calling them Preet. Yeah, when you Preet with a knight, this is basically how they fuse in with each other. And as such, when Himino and the knights go so far as to fuse with each other, it's here where we see that they have any kind of element. Sometimes the element itself replicates on what kind of power they have and whatever kind of weapon it possesses. As long as they actually beat the demon larva, they'll get to the Princess of Disaster before all of the world gets consumed by it. However, I will say for a series like this, it did get my interest right away. I mean, think about it. 7 knights gathering around just to help out a magical girl and as well, and they all fuse inwards to make some kind of element. That's something you don't see that often. And like I said in the community post, if you've read it beforehand, then you already know that this is basically Snow White mixed with a bit of the 7 knights instead of 7 dwarves. God only knows if there were 7 dwarves around, but hey, we can't always have everything. But what's really weird is that when I was watching some videos to see this, I will admit the closest thing someone said in a video that they always said that this is a ripoff of Sailor Moon again. Say it with me, guys. You know what I'm gonna say. It's not. And yeah, I know the video itself was old, but come on now. At least about the few comments I found in that said video actually did state what I was saying in that video that I would have went in there anyways. Prétear is not a Sailor Moon ripoff. Yes, there's a princess. Yes, there are handsome men, but honestly, aside from those, it doesn't really show anything Sailor Moon related. I guess you could say, hey, the magical girl thing, but like I said in the Wedding Peach video, at least do your research if you ever gonna make that comparison. Seriously, I can't stand this level of people saying that one thing is the same thing as another. I'm gonna keep saying this again and again. It's not unless you do your freaking homework. But one thing's for sure about Prétear is that it doesn't really have anything to do with, let's say, romance is the big struggle. While there is romance because, well, it's a reverse harem, it's more on say, comedy and as well as magical girl, but as well as a show of reverse harem with these here knights. And keep in mind, this here series came out a few years prior from Oron, so don't make any subtle comparisons between those two. But another thing I want to bring up is that Prétear in of itself is also not one about the power of friendship and stuff like that. This is more like, say, the themes are focusing on family, loneliness, and self-acceptance, while it's still having the white Prétear sacrificing her own life in order to save others before the Princess of Disaster actually arrives. And when it comes right down to it, there's a lot to unfold here. But as such, if I listed all the characters here, we'd be here all day, so I guess I can try my best to not ramble on as much as I did in the previous episode with Princess Comet, so let's go over the characters we do focus on. I might as well start off with Himino, and while it seems like not much, at first glance when I first heard about this here story being a little bit representing of Snow White, I thought at first she was going to be what she is, very shy, very much in a way that just makes her feel cautious and not have much character besides that. But also, I should really point out that she's not always like that. Don't get me wrong, she is klutzy because we need another her klutz to the counter. But aside from that, she's also very helpful in her own way. And while she is weird, she's also in a very endearing way, very nice in her own friendly way. She's also very much willing to help out her friends, but it's also worth pointing out that she does get in a hard time finding out what to do, especially when she preets with the other knights. So whenever she does fight back, she has to do whatever she can to protect them. Then there's also the Seven Knights, the first one being Hayate. While it seems not much, he starts off what you expect. Very bitter, very cold towards our main heroine, but still he'll manage to grow over time to get used to her. And as such, he's the power of the knife from the wind, and he also can make wind blades without making a wind sword. That's pretty cool if you think about it. Next up, there's Sasame, who's the knight of sound and capable of creating shock waves. While you can't really see the sound, you can also hear sounds by just hearing things that you don't normally hear, especially what you want to hear. And I really enjoy that for what it's worth, because they really put a lot into what they have with that kind of power. Next up, there's Go. Despite looking all fierce, and I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw the series, I thought at first he looked like he came from a shonen anime. Seriously, the spiky hair, the red outfit, the way he talks to others. Though admittedly, I kind of find it funny how he's actually voiced by Spike Spencer. If you don't know who Spike Spencer is, he's mostly known for voicing the character Shinji Ikari from Evangelion, the old dub, not the new one specifically. And then there's also Rollo from Code Geass. Yeah, a lot of these dub voice actors came from Sentai Filmworks, so get used to that. But I thought I'd bring that up anyways, but I'm not gonna voice too many of these here characters, voice actors, but let's move on to that. Anyways, here Go is really the Knight of Fire, who also battles with fireballs, and while he is like a big brotherly type towards the younger knights, he's not afraid to use it for his own advantage. So much so that he really does use it in good ways. Now at first glance I thought he'd be hot-headed, and while he does have that sometimes, it's also worth pointing out he does really seem very supportive, and I like that. Next up, there's K. While it seems like he is okay, I'm just gonna say it right now, I thought at first looking at him he looked like he came from the Utena series, because think about it, the pretty boy hair color and shininess towards him, and almost like he could be a good version of Dio. No, in this case he's really the Knight of Light, who utilizes beams of light, and what's more, he can actually give good advice when he gets right down to using it to his own advantage. Yeah, well, it seems like he really is one of those characters that has that kind of instinct hanged on him. I really do admire what they have with him, especially when it comes to using those powers and not showing his prettiness as they say, hey, we might as well make him flamboyant, and just that. I'm glad they gave him more character, because otherwise I wouldn't know what else to say about that. Next up, there's Manon, who, while he seems like the older brother of the younger ones, it's also worth noting that he's also the Knight of Ice, who's also freezes objects. Not much to say about him beyond that, but he does seem like he likes Himino a lot more than one may expect. But I'm glad they don't really show any lustrous feelings towards that, because otherwise it'd be a bit creepy. Keep in mind, these knights are supposed to be either teenagers or at least pre-teens or younger. I'm just saying, I'm glad they didn't go that far. But I'm glad they actually had the Knight Ice. But am I the one who thinks that he could have also came from Hunter x Hunter of all things? Nothing much to say about that, but just thought I'd bring that up. Then there's also Hajime. Hajime is the Knight of Ice, and who uses water-based whips to stop any kind of demon larva as well. Now, I will say, for a character like him, there isn't much to him other than he does look up to being a knight and protecting Himino, but I will say that's really what I have to say about him in his own favor. It's just really a wonder what would happen if it did go that far. And finally, we got the youngest knight, Shin, who's the Knight of Plants and Wood. Yep, the youngest one actually has a power that does a lot, but he doesn't really do much anyways. I can understand that he also creates containment fields, but beyond that, I don't really have that much to say about him. I guess you could say he's like Honey, his senpai in some way from Oran, but again, this came out years prior from Oran, so I wouldn't make that comparison. No, in this case, I'm just saying that he's really known to be the youngest. Like, he's not known to have much of anything else. Very cutesy, helps out sometimes, and looks up to the knights every now and then, and hopes to protect Himino. There's not much to him other than that, but hey, it's a start. Next up, there's Mowada. Honestly, for someone who's the stepsister for Himino, I have to say she's actually probably one of the nicer ones out there. Not to say the other one is bad or anything, but I'll get to her when I get to it. Here though, Mawada is the younger sister, but she's also quieter and much more reserved. It's also worth noting that later on we do get to see that sometimes she's always wondering what the family would be doing without their father, because, like Himino's mother, their father is no longer around. But as such, though, it goes without saying that she does get a little lonely at times and has a hard time accepting who she is at times. Though, honestly, later on, we do get to see her and Himino bond, but like I said, we'll get to about this year's series and a little bit about its flaws, but next up, there's Mayune, and I don't know what to say about her. I mean, aside from being very spoiled and rich and kind of a bitchy character and all that stuff, while she does have her moments that she will care about Himino and Mawada, it's worth noting that the most I get from her is that she can be what she is. You know, the kind often characterized as spoiled nature, and she's also known to be the one who's always trying to get Himino into trouble at times, especially whenever she breaks her chair. Bitch, you really got yourself off the deal after watching this year's series. I thought I would hate you after that, but I think I can at least save that for what I think about the character development. Plus, even if I do have much to say about Miyune, there isn't much to her other than she's really known to be very shallow and sometimes vain about herself, but by the end, she does seem like she does change her ways in some cases, so I guess we can let that slide. I'm saying I guess because I don't know how you guys would feel about that. Next up, there's Yayoi, and while it seems like she is a close friend of Himino who is supportive, albeit eccentric confidant, and I do apologize for not finding a good picture for her, but the other picture made her look a little cringy, so I do apologize for that. Anyways, despite that, however, despite being often described as the nerd with glasses, she does seem like she really does care for Himino, just getting on with Hayate, even if it does take a while for that to happen. Plus, she kind of does have this Renge energy into her. You know, the kind, reactive and all that other stuff, but nonetheless, still a pretty energetic character who's willing to fantasize about anything, even if she's a bit weird at times. Just don't let her see what you're doing in your sleep. Then there's also Kaoru, who's really Himino's father. He's also a published author of romance novels, but also has to spend a little time drinking. Despite that, however, and despite living as a commoner beforehand, he still is he's supportive of Himino no matter what, even if it does feel like he's one of those bumbling fathers. God only knows that he is really supportive, so that's something at least. And it's worth noting that he's always goofing around, so there's that going for it. And he'll do whatever he can to make sure that he puts his daughter first before anything else. Next up, there's Natsu, despite being a character that's also the stepmother for Himino, she does seem like what she is, though, portrayed as a very strict but yet caring mother as such, though, but also depicts her as more jealous or more possessive by time. But other than the time, though, she does seem like she's willing to make sure her daughters have everything they have, even if they have more of a luxury than they usually get through around. But beyond that, it does seem like there's not much I can say besides that she's really still caring by the end. And finally, before we get into the main antagonist of this year's series, we might as well talk about Tanaka. While I don't really have that much to say other than he's really the series, his own butler and such like that, he's also known to going through a lot of stress, either absent-minded or outright getting a cruel treatment, well, mostly on the hinds of Mayune. But I have to say, despite that, however, it does seem like he does care for the family's own well-being. Though, admittedly, when I first heard this series, I thought at first he was voiced by James Hong, because he does sound like he has almost the same voice as him, but no, that's actually Paul Silent. Cidello, or Cidello, yeah, I never know what that name is in English. But aside from that, though, he does sound like he's doing a James Hong impression. Once you hear the English dub, you'll probably hear what I I have to say, for a series that has 13 episodes, there are a ton of characters to go around just to talk about, but suffice to say, at least it seem like it would take me as long as it is. But despite that, however, there isn't much for me to say aside from that, but I think it's only fitting to talk about Prétear of itself. So let's talk about what happens as well in this here series. Like, who is this person, this disaster? Why is it really important for these knights to defeat this his villain before anything else? Well, there's no other way to say it, but let's talk about it, shall we? So, what is this demon larva? Well, to be honest, the demon larva are really demons that are controlled by the Princess of Disaster. Throughout the series, you get to see a lot of these here knights, and as well as Himino, defeating them one by one, because if they don't, they'll just go so far without saying that they'll do anything to make their world possessed by a demon. For some reason, when I just started watching this, I thought at first the demon larva itself was supposed to be some sort of thing that's supposed to possess humans. But as far as I watched this series, I don't think they've ever done that. No, instead they go so far as to possess things that really go without saying that they usually just make the knights, as well as Himino, go so far as to sense it. Like, whenever they sense something, it'll usually go after something that's something that's not really around other people. Though I think that's kind of wasted potential because the demon larva itself does sound like it would possess something like that. You'd think for a series like this they would do that, but I guess the only reason why they didn't do that, and I'm saying I guess because I don't know if this is for sure, is probably because they don't want to do it like either Wedding Peach did, where they had devils a human is possessing as by the demons or devils or anything, or the fact that maybe, and this is my 1% theory, maybe it's because they just didn't have that much to do with it. But I gotta say, it did really lose my grip on it, especially because this thing that I'm showing you right here is also called a giant tree. Creative name there, guys. Well, there's really a reason for that. See, the giant tree itself was actually also controlled by the Princess of Disaster, and as you can probably guess from there, she's really some character who's at the most part really someone that's really had a lot of potential. And while it's really someone I could at least say for the record I had a lot of hopes on that, I think it's only fitting to talk about the Princess of Disaster. Now, when you hear the name Princess of Disaster, what comes to your mind when you hear that name? You think that's someone with a very intimidating name that would at least do something with that. Like, say, she's the one who controls a lot of people's emotions, or maybe she's just trying to get herself all up and at it. Like, she's just trying to make everyone fall for her own trickery. But no. Instead, we get something like this. For all we can tell, Takako, yes, the Princess Disaster is named Takako here. Wait, isn't that a character from Earthian? Must be thinking of a different series. No, instead, Takako here, while she does seem like she has a lot of hate in her, and while she is having a lot more for Demon because she was supposed to be the Prétear, instead they chose Himino because Himino actually is the new Prétear. So for what it's all intents and purposes, the most we get from her is that she has this hatred and such, but we don't really get a specific reason why she has the way she is. I'm not asking for much of a backstory of anything, because if it seems like we're gonna ask for too much, don't even bother. The most we're gonna get from this character is that she's just someone who really went so far as to just do whatever she can because she just wants everyone to be controlled by her, and that's about it. Aside from that, there isn't much I can say from that beyond that she's really someone that doesn't have much of a backstory. From what I can tell, I tried looking up to see if a manga had a little more source material for it, but not really. Yeah, she does get Sasame later on. Yeah, Sasame does go through this purpose where he does have a villain arc, but it's only like say a quarter of a way almost to the end of the series. No, I'm not even kidding. They really went to go so far as to have Sasame have some love into it, which is weird because in the series they make it clear that the Leafy Knights aren't supposed to feel any love, and I guess that since Sasame actually felt something for this character, I'm not so sure why, but you get what I mean from it. And I think it's about time we talk about its character development because, oh boy, there is a lot to unpack in this package, so bear with me. Now, I want you all to bear in mind, this is just how I see it. I don't know if anyone else has seen Prétear at this point, but when I first saw this series, I thought at first they were gonna go through what you expect, saying things like they have the same cliche, hey, I hate you first and I love you for later on. But when I started seeing this in the comment section, a lot of people started to think that's really cliche. But here's the thing. As someone said before me, did you want the character to not be developed? Over the time, you see these characters do develop over time, but I feel like that's kind of a problem a lot of people seem to have with this series. From what I can tell, a lot of people always say, oh, no, they have the hate you, but I'll love you forever next later on such. And, well, I'd be lying if I didn't say this, though, but did you really think they wouldn't go through that in all intents and purposes? Because as far as I can tell, I feel like a lot of people always seem to have this struggle where they're always saying things like, oh no, we're having this trope again, the hate you, but I'll love you forever later on. But I'm just gonna come out and say this. Did you want the characters to not be developed? Because if so, that's kind of crazy. But as such, I think it's only fitting to say the character development here can be a bit much at times. Sometimes they go so far as to say they'll develop them almost too late, like say, him and me knows character, but at some point you start realizing they developed a little bit of these characters. You do get to see them grow, but only progressively a little time though. I think that's kind of the thing I have with how filmmaker when it comes to having this here series. And I think it's only fitting to talk about how filmmaker when I start seeing this series. Part of me wants to say that how filmmaker did whatever they could, but just so you know, this also came out before another series I covered before, Princess Tutu, and that had twice as many episodes than this one did. But personally, when I first started watching Prétear, I'm not saying one is better over the other or one's more flawed than the other. No, my personal opinion with Prétear is that I felt like it was a bit rushed in some places. If this series had lasted longer, maybe it would have actually stretched a little more than just this. But I'll give it this much, at least they didn't kill any of these characters. But I think that's kind of the thing when I started watching this series. With 13 episodes, there's a lot you can do, but they put so much in that it feels cramped in some places. Most of the time it feels like comedy, other times it'll feel like it'll get time to get serious, and the cycle keeps repeating itself. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't hate Prétear. I don't love it either, but I personally felt like there was something there that could have been like that. 4 volumes into a 13 episode series doesn't sound like they did a whole lot with the anime, but I'm not gonna lie, I think this series falls into the okay range. Like, there was so much more they could have done, but they chose not to do it anyways. Maybe there was more in the manga if they had so already, but I wouldn't know because I haven't read it. Should you just either watch this, is completely up to you, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm just gonna come out and say it, it's just okay for me. However, that will be the only Magical Girl podcast I'll be doing for this month, but next time, maybe we'll do a chillaxing stream. But I wish you all a happy Valentine's Day. I thank you all so much for watching, and as always, stay flamingo-tastic. I'll see you all next